Hey everyone, welcome back. Ready for another deep dive?
Always.
Awesome. So today we're going to be talking about male-female relationships, but from a very specific viewpoint.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
Yeah, so um, we're going to be looking at it from an evolutionary perspective.
Interesting. I mean, that's a pretty fundamental way to approach it, right? Like going all the way back to the basics.
Exactly. And to make things even more interesting, our main source material is this book written by a male pickup artist.
Oh, wow. Okay. That's definitely a unique perspective.
It is.
Yeah.
And it's surprisingly insightful. I mean, before you think it's just some cheesy dating manual,
Right.
it actually offers some really fascinating and sometimes controversial insights into how men approach relationships.
I can imagine. So are we talking like evolutionary psychology meets the art of seduction?
Pretty much. It's like taking a look at those primal instincts and seeing how they play out in the modern dating world.
That's a cool concept. I'm in.
Awesome. So let's dive in, shall we? Think back way, way back, like even before humans were around.
Okay, back to the caveman days.
Exactly. It all comes down to survival and reproduction, right?
Hmm.
Those lizard brains were hardwired for it.
Exactly. Survival of the fittest, passing on your genes. It's all very primal.
Right. And even though we've evolved a lot since then, we've got these big brains and fancy technology,
Hmm.
those primal instincts are still with us. They're influencing how we view and interact with potential partners.
I completely agree. I mean, sometimes it feels like no matter how much society changes, certain things just stay the same.
And our source material really dives into that, especially in Chapter 4. It talks about how men are instinctively drawn to certain visual cues in women.
Oh, like what kind of cues?
Well, things that signal fertility, youthful appearance, a certain waist-to-hip ratio.
Right, those classic signs of health and reproductive potential.
Exactly. And it's incredible how these ancient impulses still resonate in our modern world.
I mean, think about all the images we're bombarded with every day in advertising on social media.
It's everywhere.
It's like those primal instincts are being amplified or maybe even distorted by all this visual stimulation.
The book actually makes this really interesting comparison to fast food.
How come listening?
It says that just like fast food tricks our brains into craving those unhealthy things,
Mm-hmm.
modern media, with all its airbrushing and filters, it can create these unrealistic beauty standards that kind of hijack our natural instincts.
Whoa. That is a really interesting comparison. It's like our brains are being bombarded with these super stimuli that kind of mess with our natural wiring.
Exactly. And it makes you wonder how much of what we find attractive is actually natural.
Versus something we've been conditioned to believe by society and the media.
Right. Like, are we making choices based on our genuine preferences, or are we unconsciously responding to these amplified signals?
That's a question we could all ask ourselves. Like, are we in the driver's seat or are we being driven by forces we don't even realize?
Food for thought, for sure. But the source doesn't stop at basic attraction. It goes on to categorize men into these distinct behavioral archetypes,
Okay, now this sounds really interesting. What kind of archetypes are we talking about?
like the nice guy, the adventurer, and a few others. And each one supposedly has its own unique mating strategy.
So it's saying that men have evolved different approaches to relationships depending on their personality type.
Yeah, and it's fascinating to think about how these archetypes might actually reflect different approaches to relationships that evolved in response to different challenges. Like back in the day, different personality types might have been more successful in different environments, right?
Right. So maybe in one environment, being a nice guy was the best way to attract a mate.
And in another, maybe you needed to be more of an adventurer to get the girl.
Makes sense.
I was reading Chapter 7, which, by the way, has some truly hilarious and relatable examples of these archetypes in action.
Oh, I bet.
I was literally thinking, oh my gosh, I totally know a guy who's a classic nice guy, or that guy's a total adventurer. It's spot on.
So it really does seem to resonate with real life experiences.
It totally does.
Yeah.
It really makes you think about the patterns we see in relationships and why certain types just seem to gravitate towards each other. Have you ever noticed these archetypes playing out in your own life?
Definitely. It's like those light bulb moments when you're like, oh my God, that's so true. I think most people would be able to relate to these archetypes in some way.
Absolutely. And I think that's what makes this book so engaging. It takes these complex ideas about evolution and psychology and makes them relatable.
Yeah, it's not just some dry academic theory. It's like it's actually applicable to our lives.
Exactly.
Okay.
Okay, so now we're going to move into a topic that can be a little more controversial.
Ooh, I love a good controversial topic.
All right, well, get ready. because we're about to tackle the whole idea of power dynamics between men and women.
Okay. Yeah, that's definitely a hot button issue. Lay it on me.
So the book talks about this shift from traditional patriarchy, that whole male-dominated society thing,
Right.
to what it perceives as a rising matriarchy fueled by, you guessed it, feminism.
Ooh, okay. So we're getting into the battle of the sexes territory here. I'm interested to hear what this pickup artist has to say about that.
Well, he basically presents this view that feminism is disrupting what he calls the natural balance of power,
Interesting.
and that this has, wait for it, negative consequences for both men and women.
Whoa. Okay, so he's saying that challenging traditional gender roles is actually a bad thing.
That's his argument.
Yeah.
He argues that by challenging those traditional gender roles, feminism is kind of throwing the whole system off kilter, leading to confusion and resentment in relationships.
Wow. That's a pretty bold statement.
It is, and it's definitely a perspective that sparks a lot of debate, which is what makes it so fascinating to unpack.
Absolutely. So is he saying that things were better back in the good old days of patriarchy?
Well, he doesn't explicitly say that,
Hmm.
but he definitely implies that this shift in power dynamics is at the root of many of the problems we see in modern relationships.
That's a pretty provocative claim. I'm sure our listeners have some thoughts on this one, too.
Oh, I'm sure they do. It's a topic that really gets people talking.
For sure. So are we going to dive deeper into his arguments and maybe some counterpoints?
We are. But first, we've got to address this bombshell statement from the book. Ready?
Hit me with it.
Women want resources and men want sex.
Whoa. All right. Straight to the point, huh?
Right, like no beating around the bush here.
Yeah.
But before you dismiss it as some kind of crude oversimplification, Chapter 7 actually unpacks this idea in the context of relationships, and honestly, it gets surprisingly insightful.
Okay, I'm curious now. Tell me more.
He basically argues that these desires are deeply rooted in biology, right? That women are driven to seek security and stability, for themselves and for their potential offspring.
That makes sense from an evolutionary perspective.
Right. And men are driven to, well, spread their genes.
The classic drive to procreate.
Exactly. And he uses this to explain a lot of the common complaints women have in relationships, like men not being emotionally available or not contributing enough financially.
The age-old relationship struggles.
Right. And he actually lists out a bunch of these complaints, which is honestly kind of funny, but also kind of eye-opening.
So is he saying that these relationship issues are just a result of our biological programming?
In a way, yes. But it also makes you wonder, are these hardwired desires still as relevant in today's world?
Where women have more economic independence.
Exactly. Like, are we still playing by those same primal rules?
It's a question worth considering for sure. It makes you wonder how much of our behavior in relationships is nature versus nurture.
It's a fascinating debate. And it's something we're going to delve into a little bit deeper as we continue our deep dive.
Can't wait. It's interesting, this whole idea of the game. It's a term that you hear a lot in the pickup artist community. But I kind of feel like it goes deeper than just dating.
Yeah, I've heard that term too, the game. But honestly, I'm not really sure I understand what it means. Like, is it some kind of secret code or something?
Well, it's not exactly a secret code, but it's definitely about understanding the unspoken rules and dynamics that kind of shape those interactions between men and women, especially when it comes to attraction. And, our source really dives deep into the psychology behind it all.
So it's like understanding those strategies and signals.
Yeah, exactly.
That makes sense. But, I don't know, doesn't that sound a bit manipulative, though? Like, shouldn't relationships be based on, like, a genuine connection, not some kind of game?
That's the big question, right? And the book argues that by understanding the game, men can actually increase their chances of success with women.
Okay.
But it also raises, a lot of ethical questions
Right.
about whether this approach is truly authentic and respectful.
Definitely a slippery slope.
Yeah.
I mean, I can see how understanding those dynamics could be helpful, but I also worry about it turning into this way to manipulate people.
Exactly. And that's where I think we need to be really careful about taking this game mentality too far. Because, while it might be helpful to understand the dynamics, ultimately we shouldn't be sacrificing authenticity or emotional honesty for the sake of, winning some kind of game.
Yeah, it's like, are we trying to build genuine relationships, or are we just trying to score points?
Exactly. And that brings us to, I think, another kind of controversial aspect of the game.
Okay.
This whole idea of walking away if a woman isn't showing enough interest.
Ooh, interesting.
Our source frames this as a way of, demonstrating high value and desirability.
Mhm.
But honestly, it also feels a bit manipulative, doesn't it?
Yeah, that whole take it or leave it attitude.
Right.
I get that you don't want to chase someone who's not interested, but it just seems like that could so easily be used as a way to play games
Right.
and, create drama.
Absolutely. And I think it's really important to recognize that this game mentality can be harmful
Right.
to both men and women. It can lead to a lack of trust, emotional detachment, and, really focusing on those superficial qualities over genuine connection.
Speaking of manipulation, the book also talks about using techniques like nagging,
Oh, yeah, negging.
which, for those who don't know, are basically backhanded compliments intended to kind of undermine a woman's confidence.
Right. The idea is to make her feel a little insecure so she'll seek your approval.
Yeah.
And honestly, these tactics are clearly manipulative and disrespectful. And I think in the long run, they're probably just going to backfire.
I mean, I can't imagine that kind of approach would lead to like a healthy, lasting relationship.
Right.
It's all about creating an imbalance of power, which is the opposite of what we should be striving for.
Exactly. Trust, vulnerability, and mutual respect. Those are the foundations of a strong relationship. And those qualities are completely at odds with this game mentality.
So the book also gets uh, pretty explicit about creating a sexualized atmosphere.
Okay.
Talking about using suggestive language, touch, body language to try to build that sexual tension and, escalate physical intimacy.
And, even going into detail about the importance of physical dominance, suggesting that men should take the lead in physical interactions.
Mm-hmm.
Now, it's one thing to understand the natural progression of physical intimacy in a relationship, but I think it's another to use these kind of tactics to manipulate someone into a sexual encounter.
Yeah, it's like that's where things get really uncomfortable for me.
Right.
It's like, where's that line between, flirting and coercion?
Right. And consent is absolutely paramount in any sexual encounter.
Yes.
Both parties need to be enthusiastic and comfortable every step of the process. And I think this is where the pickup artist perspective often falls short. It often seems more focused on getting a woman into bed than actually building a genuine connection.
Yeah, that conquest mentality does not sound like a recipe for a healthy relationship.
Definitely not. Now, the book also dives into the psychology of female attraction,
Okay.
arguing that women are drawn to certain qualities in men like confidence, social status, and resourcefulness.
Okay, so basically like the classic alpha male archetype.
Exactly. And from an evolutionary standpoint, these qualities would have signaled a man's ability to provide and protect.
Right.
And the book encourages men to cultivate these traits through, things like career success, social status, and even physical fitness.
I can see how those qualities might be appealing to some women, but I also think it's a bit of an oversimplification.
Yeah.
Attraction is complex,
Right.
and there's so much more to it than just like status and resources.
Absolutely. And reducing female attraction to just this simple formula overlooks the fact that, women, just like men, are individuals with their own unique preferences and values.
Totally. The book also emphasizes creating like an air of mystery and intrigue,
Oh, mysterious.
suggesting that, men shouldn't reveal too much about themselves too early on.
Right.
A little bit of withholding, unpredictability, that can spark a woman's curiosity,
Yeah.
according to the source.
There might be some truth to that, but I think it's also really easy to take that advice too far and end up being deceptive or playing mind games.
Right?
Genuine connection, I believe, comes from authenticity and open communication, not from calculated manipulation.
Now, I think a lot of people have experienced that friend zone situation at some point where you like develop feelings for someone,
Right.
but they only see you as a friend. And the book has some interesting advice on how to navigate that,
Okay.
but it also gets a little tricky.
Right. Lay it on me. What's the advice?
Well, the book argues that men often end up in the friend zone because they fail to establish themselves as a potential romantic partner, like early on.
Gotcha.
And it suggests being upfront about your intentions from the start
Okay.
to avoid getting stuck in that platonic dynamic.
Okay. So be bold and direct from the beginning.
Yeah. But the way the book suggests going about it seems kind of manipulative, like acting distant and aloof to try and trigger those feelings of jealousy or insecurity.
Yeah, I can see how that would rub people the wrong way.
Right.
It's basically using emotional manipulation to try and force someone into feeling a certain way.
If you're genuinely interested in someone, wouldn't it just be better to have an honest conversation about your feelings
Absolutely.
and see where things go from there?
Communication is key. And respecting someone's decision, even if it's not what you hoped for.
Right.
You know, a true friend will want you to be happy, even if it means letting go of that romantic connection.
Yeah, and rejection is definitely like a tough part of dating.
Yeah.
And the book talks about developing a thick skin and not taking it personally.
Right. You can't let rejection crush you.
Exactly. It encourages men to view rejection as like an opportunity to learn and improve.
Yeah, turn that negative into a positive.
Right. But I also noticed that it kind of downplays the woman's feelings in those situations.
Oh, interesting.
It's like, don't worry about why she said no. Just focus on getting better at the game.
It's important to remember that rejection is not a personal attack. It just means you weren't the right fit for that particular person at that particular time, and respecting her decision is crucial.
Okay, so this whole concept of social proof was really interesting to me. It's the idea that people are more attracted to those who are, already desired by others.
Yo, so like that everybody wants what they can't have mentality.
Exactly. The book suggests that men can increase their attractiveness by surrounding themselves with attractive women and kind of creating that perception of popularity.
So it's all about showing off your social status.
Yeah, I mean, I can see how that would play into our evolutionary instincts, but it also seems kind of superficial.
It is, and I think it's important to be aware of how easily this can be manipulated. Just because someone is surrounded by attractive people doesn't mean they're actually a high-quality partner.
Totally. It just seems like a recipe for shallow, unfulfilling relationships.
Right, you're just trying to win a popularity contest instead of building that real connection.
Exactly.
And that brings us back to the importance of authenticity.
Right.
Genuine passion and purpose will always be more attractive than any calculated attempt to impress.
So the book also talks about the importance of kino, which is like the art of touch,
Ooh,
physical escalation in seduction.
okay.
And it describes techniques for, gradually increasing physical intimacy. But
As with any aspect of physical intimacy, consent and respect are absolutely paramount.
absolutely.
Using touch as a manipulative tactic or pushing someone beyond their comfort zone is never acceptable.
No, never. And it feels like, again, this is another area where that pickup artist perspective can be problematic.
Right.
It's like they're trying to turn physical intimacy into a game with these specific rules and strategies.
Building physical intimacy should be a gradual and mutual process based on trust and genuine desire.
So the book also offers some advice on like managing expectations and avoiding those common pitfalls in relationships.
Okay, that's helpful.
And one of the things it cautions against is becoming too invested too early on in the relationship.
Right.
It encourages men to maintain a sense of independence and avoid appearing, needy or clingy.
While I understand the importance of maintaining your own identity within a relationship, I feel like that advice also seems a bit detached.
It does.
Like it's about finding that balance,
Right.
between independence and intimacy.
You don't want to lose yourself in a relationship, but you also don't want to be so guarded that you prevent like a real connection from happening.
Exactly. It's a delicate dance that requires open communication and a willingness to be emotionally present.
Now, the book also delves into this idea of women using shit tests to kind of assess a man's worthiness.
Shit tests, okay.
And these tests can take many forms from, subtle challenges to outright provocations.
So is he saying that women are like intentionally trying to make things difficult?
Well, the book frames it that way, arguing that women use these tests to gauge a man's confidence, his resilience, and his ability to handle pressure.
Interesting.
And it encourages men to respond to these tests with strength and assertiveness, rather than, defensiveness or insecurity.
But I can see how that perspective could lead to a lot of conflict and misunderstandings.
Probably.
Instead of viewing these interactions as tests, maybe it's more productive to approach them with curiosity and try to understand what's really going on beneath the surface.
Like maybe she's not trying to test you at all. Maybe she's just expressing a need or trying to communicate something important.
Exactly. And that's where good communication comes in. If you're feeling tested or challenged, the best approach is to just have an open and honest conversation with your partner about your feelings.
So the book also emphasizes creating a lifestyle that's attractive to women,
Okay.
suggesting that men should focus on personal growth, building a fulfilling life
Yeah.
and pursuing their passions.
You know what? That's actually really solid advice, and not just for attracting women.
Right. Like building a fulfilling life is essential for anyone's happiness and well-being.
Absolutely. The problem is when that becomes the sole focus, like you're building a life just to impress others instead of living authentically.
That makes sense. Like genuine passion and purpose will always be more attractive than like any calculated attempt to create a facade.
Couldn't agree more. Now, the book also gets into the topic of finances,
Okay.
encouraging men to be financially responsible and invest in their future.
Yeah, that's definitely important.
Right.
But I can also see how it could be misconstrued as like equating financial success with attractiveness.
Yeah, it's not about the size of your bank account. It's about being responsible and having a plan for the future.
True wealth lies in like character, integrity, and genuine connection, not just in your financial status.
So as we kind of wrap up this part of our deep dive,
Hmm.
I think it's important to remember that the pickup artist perspective is just one perspective.
Right.
It's a perspective that often prioritizes short-term conquests over long-term relationships.
Mm.
And while some of the insights into human behavior might be interesting, we need to approach this material with a critical eye and really consider those ethical implications.
Building healthy, fulfilling relationships requires authenticity, vulnerability, mutual respect, and that genuine desire for connection.
Absolutely. Reducing relationships to a game or a series of manipulative tactics is not a path to lasting love.
Okay, so we spent a lot of time, kind of exploring the male perspective on relationships, especially through this pickup artist book.
Yeah,
It's been fascinating, eye-opening, and honestly a little unsettling at times.
I agree. Yeah.
But I think it's super important to remember that this is just one viewpoint,
One perspective, right.
and there's so much more to the story.
Absolutely. It's like we've been looking at, this complex puzzle and we've only examined one piece.
Right.
To really understand those male-female relationships, we need to consider, a broader range of perspectives and those influences.
Exactly. Like the book barely touches on the impact of like societal expectations,
Right?
gender roles, which I think play a huge role in shaping how we view and experience relationships.
For sure. I mean, for centuries, men and women have been, socialized into these very specific roles. And while those roles are evolving, they still exert a powerful influence on our, subconscious beliefs and behaviors.
It's like we're carrying this invisible baggage from generations past,
Yeah.
and it just can create a lot of friction in, modern relationships.
Oh, absolutely.
Especially when you think about it, women today are, more likely to be financially independent,
Right.
career driven,
Mm-hmm.
which challenges those traditional notions of like male dominance.
Absolutely.
And then men, on the other hand, might feel that pressure to live up to those, outdated ideals of masculinity,
Right.
which can lead to, emotional suppression and difficulty expressing vulnerability.
I mean, it's no wonder that so many couples struggle to find a balance. This whole power dynamic between men and women is so complex and it's constantly shifting.
It is. And I think that's one of the areas where, the pickup artist perspective just falls short.
For sure.
It often simplifies these complex dynamics into, a game of winners and losers,
Right.
which isn't really helpful or realistic.
No, it's not. It's like they're missing this crucial element,
What's that?
emotional intelligence.
Oh, yeah, that's huge.
It is. Emotional intelligence is, it's that ability to understand and manage your own emotions as well as the emotions of others. It's
Mhm.
about empathy, compassion, communication, and, that ability to build strong, healthy connections based on mutual respect and understanding.
And honestly, that's something that's often lacking in like the pickup artist approach, which tends to prioritize manipulation and control, over that genuine connection.
Yeah, like they're so focused on winning the game that they forget about the real purpose of a relationship, which is to build a loving and supportive partnership.
Exactly. So where do we go from here? How do we, move beyond these superficial games and build relationships that are based on like authenticity and emotional depth?
Well, I think it starts with recognizing that, healthy communication is the foundation of any strong relationship.
It's about being able to, express your needs and desires clearly,
Mhm.
respectfully,
Yes.
and being able to listen, attentively and empathetically to your partner.
And being willing to be vulnerable and open with each other, even when it's scary or uncomfortable.
That's so important. You can't build real intimacy without, vulnerability and trust.
Absolutely. And I think we also need to, challenge those outdated gender roles and expectations that are still creating so much conflict in relationships.
Right. It's not about, men versus women.
Right.
It's about recognizing that, we're all in this together.
Yeah,
We need to support each other as we navigate these, changing dynamics.
absolutely. So as we wrap up our deep dive here, I want to leave our listeners with a few, key takeaways. First, remember that relationships are complex.
Hmm.
There's no one-size-fits-all approach. And what works for one couple might not work for another.
And second, be wary of any advice that encourages, manipulation or control.
Mm.
True love is built on that foundation of respect, trust, and genuine connection.
Couldn't agree more. And finally, never underestimate the power of communication.
So true.
Open and honest communication. It's the key to resolving those conflicts, building that intimacy, and creating a relationship that, truly thrives.
So there you have it. We've journeyed from, the primal depths of evolutionary psychology to the complex landscape of modern relationships.
We've explored those different perspectives, challenged assumptions, and hopefully sparked some, insightful conversations along the way.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into male-female relationships. We'll see you next time.